Rabbi Dov Lipman is an author and former member of Knesset of the Yesh Atid party. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Sure, my pleasure, Laura.
So first of all, we've had a first vote in the Knesset today. Why don't you update us about what exactly is going on and how likely it is that we're going to actually see an election in the coming months?
Absolutely. It was a dramatic day in the Knesset. We're just 7 months after this new government and went into action. There was a vote brought to the floor, brought by the opposition, to disperse the Knesset and go to a new election. And it passed 61 to 54. I remind you, 61 is the exact number for a majority in the Knesset. And now a lot of people don't understand, and I was talking about this, it's a complicated process. I have students from outside of Israel, from America and England at Tiferet or Ramat Beit Shemesh, and they were asking me, how does this whole process work? It's a process. The vote went today. Now it goes to committee. It has to be voted out of committee and back to the Knesset floor for a first reading, then back to committee again, voted out of committee and back to the Knesset for 2 last consecutive readings. So on the one hand, they did vote today and blue and white joined it. So that pretty much breaks apart the government, but you still have this buffer, so to speak, in this upcoming period of time when you have this ping pong with the committees where in theory, if someone wanted to salvage this, they could try.
Speaking of blue and white, I have to ask, are you surprised that Benny Gantz made this announcement last night that he decided he would vote to support Yair Lapid's bill to disperse the Knesset?
Having watched the complete dysfunctionality of the government, especially in recent weeks, but it's been pretty much since the government went into action in May, it's not surprising. The surprising part is because blue and white is decreased significantly in the polls and has a risk of literally disappearing from the political map, or at least of being a significant player. So very often politicians will continue the government even if it's not functional because they just want to maintain their positions and being in power. But in this particular case, where the dysfunction was so great and the differences of opinion were so vast, and I'll add, Benny Gantz and Gabi Ashkenazi, senior members of the government, so excluded from some significant steps that have happened lately, especially on the diplomatic front, it wasn't surprising to see that they would say, listen, we tried, we hope this could work, but we see clearly it's not able to function, and we have to just try to go to an election and see what happens next.
Do you think that that means that Gantz regrets his decision to join Netanyahu's government?
It's hard for me to get inside his head and really understand what he's thinking, but there has to be some place where he says to himself, I was the head of this large alternative, God, that was blue and white together with Yesh Atid and all of their partners, and I broke that partnership, and now my party is polling some single digits, and I've accomplished nothing along the way. I certainly did not become prime minister according to the rotation agreement. However, I will say there have been overtures from Yesh Atid to Benny Gantz saying, let's possibly work together again. The one condition I'm sure there will be is that Yair Lapid will head the ticket instead of Benny Gantz. So somewhere there has to be regret. Benny Gantz says he felt that the country could not go to a fourth election back last spring, and therefore he had to take the step to at least give it a try. But blue and white supporters are not necessarily going to be rally around him as well, and they may be looking towards other alternatives as they try to unseat Netanyahu.
I have to say, this really feels like deja vu heading to another election, especially in the middle of a pandemic. How can the country possibly afford this right now?
I'm going to actually take a different approach to it because your question is very strong and legitimate, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. But once we have a government which is not really functioning anyway, and is not really making very good decisions anyway, or they're not coming to decisions, there's a part of me that actually feels, let's give the mandate back to the people. Are they happy with Netanyahu's leadership or not? Maybe they are, maybe they're not. There are many other things that are on the horizon right now, real issues. The Biden administration coming to power. Do people want Netanyahu to lead the way for Israel with the Biden administration, or an alternative? All the diplomatic things that are taking place in the region. I'll also add Netanyahu's trial actually starting. So on a certain level, there are real issues that are on the table at the moment in this election, which I think didn't exist during the 3 election cycles we had in 2019, 2020. And I'll add one more point, Laura, which is very, very interesting. And that is, whereas in the past elections, yes, blue and white was very large, and they even had larger numbers than they could at times, but they had no path towards a government on their own. Going into this election cycle, there, according to the polls at least, there was a potential for a coalition that could coalesce between Yamina of Naftali Bennett, Yesh Atid of Yair Lapid, Blue and White of Benny Gantz, and Israel Beitenu led by Avigdor Lieberman, where they alone could, in a certain constellation, have 61 seats and come together and say, while we might disagree about certain issues, let's come together about the pandemic, about the health, about the economy, about healing the wounds in Israeli society. And Israeli voters might be open to that message. So there might be a whole new story related to this election, and it's not the same old that we had in 2019 and 2020.
Well, definitely a very interesting time in Israeli politics. Dov Lipman, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Laura.